session this morning, so thank you all for being here. And this is one of the sessions that's being broadcasted via the web, so that's an exciting opportunity. It's my pleasure to introduce Catherine McGurra and Claire Keedy, who are here today to talk to us about the housing paradox, student housing insecurity on the college campus. For those of you who are viewing this remotely on the web, feel free to use that dialogue box in the corner of your screen to chat with us and ask questions, and those will get passed on to our facilitator. So please join me in welcoming our two speakers today.
Thank you all. You would think that after 10 plus years of working with Larry Roper, I would know better than to schedule myself to talk after him, but alas, here we are. Thanks for joining us today. We do have a rather robust presentation, so we want to get through as much as we can. My name again is Catherine McGurra.
And my name is Claire Keedy.
We are both active tweeters, so feel free to use different hashtags. We've got them up there. We've got the NWACUHO for session 4. We're also going to use the NW15 because that's the year that it is. But yeah, let's go ahead and get started.
All right, so I find it really interesting that we did go after Larry. Actually, it really makes this slide a little bit less relevant when I think about it. When we talk about residential populations and we talk about the financial concerns that students may be experiencing, we really are kind of in some ways entering into this uncharted territory because we don't necessarily think about, first off, college students as experiencing housing insecurity and food insecurity, but certainly students that are housed and have dining plans aren't experiencing this. And so that's kind of the conversation we're going to have today, is just talking a little bit about that and how it's impacting students and how it is actually happening and what we're doing about it in Oregon State.
So as Claire kind of alluded to, this issue is rather hard to see for those of us who work in housing, particularly because the population of students who are with us, we're making some assumptions about the fact that they are with us living in our facilities, they've got a dining plan, they've got that baseline Maslow needs covered. What we're finding, and going back to what Larry was talking about today, the students who are coming in with the most need end up leaving with the most debt. And we are a part of that as well, especially when you factor in things like live-on requirements for a year or two, public-private institutions, costs for the various types of housing that we offer. And so there's a lot of assumptions that are made on our part that we need to have critical looks at as we move into how do we provide housing for the holistic student.
And so when we talk about that issue as being obscured, there are some studies out there that look at food insecurity on college campuses. One most recently done at Western Oregon University, and one of the things that they found was that as many as 59% of the students surveyed had been experiencing food insecurity at some point in the year, that from the time that they were asked that question looking back 1 year, which is a significant amount. But before I go into sort of causes of that, let me talk a little bit about what food insecurity is. So the USDA actually touches on food insecurity, and they talk about it in terms of the spectrum of food security. So we've got very high food security at one end and very low food security or food insecurity at the other end. And so one of those is food insecurity with hunger, where a student is actually missing meals. And then the other one is students that are getting unhealthy food. They're not able to adequately feed themselves so that they're getting proper nutrition. And so these students are the ones that we are more likely to see in residential populations, because what they're doing is they're signing up for meal plans that are maybe lower in cost, but what they're receiving isn't necessarily going to adequately feed them.
Another thing we're finding, there's been a lot of focus on this over the last few years, is that when you factor in breaks, a lot of our students don't have anywhere to go. And I think our friends actually at the University of Washington had a story that got published at the end of the winter break, with a student who was sitting on the front steps of her building, and the campus police stopped by and wanted to know what she was doing there. And she mentioned it's a couple hours before the building opens and she has nowhere to go. And we are seeing that with the changing landscape of students on our campuses, we've got a lot of foster youth who are transitioning out of those programs. They don't have a home. And again, that goes back to the obscurity issue and a lot of assumptions that we're making on our parts in terms of, well, students, this is what they do, is they come and live with us, and then we send them away for a month during break, and they come back and everything's great. But not everybody has a family, not everyone has a home to go to. We are their home for that 10-month period. So what options are we providing during that time?
And so when we're talking about college students across the board, it can be a really challenging thing to see. When we're talking about students living on campus with us, it becomes even more challenging because we've got these students, they're in residence halls, they're looking at their peers and they're seeing that their peers have it all together and everything's fine, whether they do or not, but that's what they're seeing. And they're sort of seeing also this notion on the campus landscape that everybody is doing fine. And there's a lot of shame and there's a lot of stigma in not necessarily having enough food, not necessarily having a place to go for whatever reason that might be. And so these students really get lost and they fall through the cracks because we aren't necessarily looking for them and they certainly aren't interested in reaching out to us.
So as we started mapping out a route for providing options for students who are experiencing some of these issues, it was very much the road less traveled. I know for me, as I'm looking at implementing a new procedure on our campus or a new system or a new living learning community, I'm reaching out to colleagues across the country and saying, hey, you've got an honors program, what is that like? There wasn't anyone else out there doing these things when we started talking about it. In fact, a lot of the work that happened on our campus happened before Claire and I got to the roles that we're in. But it became necessary, again, that whole student development nerd, going back to Maslow. Are we really providing those baseline needs for everyone? Or are we assuming that they're good to go? Or, I've got 5,000 people on my campus, 4,000 of them are good, the rest, we'll get there. So how are we really looking at that and what are we doing? And as a profession, how is both Northwest NWACUHO, how's the NWACUHO-I, how are we looking at this as a holistic issue? So then we realized that we couldn't just sit there, we couldn't just stand there and not take action. There was too many things happening on our campus that to not take action would be sending a message that we no longer felt we could support. And so we recognized that this was our problem and we had to do something about it.
And OSU has this tremendous history with students specifically of being forward thinking about supporting their peers. And so even as early as the 1980s, students were thinking about affordability and they were thinking about what students need to be successful. And in the 80s, students were actually thinking about health insurance. And so at that time, the students created their own health insurance. And they started selling it to students and the university sued them and won. And so the students weren't able to do that anymore. But what they decided out of that was they were going to continue to look at student needs. And so they started offering an insurance subsidy for those students. And that was the first human services program that happened at OSU. And then throughout the 1990s and the 2000s, students started taking on other issues, such as hunger, through creating first a soup kitchen and then a food subsidy. And finally, over time, they decided as they were looking at all of these different services that were happening on campus, wouldn't it make sense for us to put this all together in one office, to build it on a human services nonprofit model, and to really support students in the ways that they need. And so that was the start of the Human Services Resource Center, which is the office that I direct. We serve students experiencing poverty, hunger, homelessness, and food insecurity. And the things that we're focusing on right now are these populations, like students living on campus, that are coming into our spaces we really didn't expect to be seen. And we spent a year after we moved to a first-year live-on requirement on campus, really trying to track what was happening on our campus. Where are we seeing issues, and are we seeing challenges with this new policy? And we started to see that. And so those are some of the conversations we started entering into.
One of the ways that our housing office partners with Claire and her program is we actually offer emergency housing. And we have two rooms in one of our buildings that are private rooms. It's just a single bedroom unit that has its own private bathroom, and they're kind of off of the main corridors of our buildings, where we can house students who are facing immediate emergency housing. So students who become homeless for some reason or another, or have a significant landlord issue, or domestic violence case that's going on, something that requires them to get out of their current situation, or if they don't have one, to get into something that's more safe for them in an immediate way. And so what will happen from that is Claire usually when the students come into her office, there's some legwork that they do, and we'll talk more about the logistics in a couple of slides. But she'll give me a call just to inquire about if there's space available. Usually she already knows, but she wants to get the ball rolling. Once she has the information about who the student is, I reach out to our residential education staff and just confirm that they don't have any concerns with this particular student, especially if they've lived on campus in the past. If they have a history of conduct, we'll say, then that might not be a good fit. Because we are putting these students in these situations into a community of 300 other students. So there's that dynamic that we need to remember.
I just want to say that I'm really appreciative of this. And actually, we've had 2 students in emergency housing over the last 2 weeks. And one of them just moved into an apartment yesterday, which is pretty exciting. So this is a tremendous program, and there's been a lot of bumps along the way, but we've really been able to iron this out. And it's been really well.
Yeah, and usually the requests come in on a Friday afternoon. If Claire and I are both gone, which thank you everyone working on our campus right now, we're almost guaranteed to get the requests coming through. And yes, it's quite a bit of work on the back end, but the fact that we're helping the students out is amazing. And there have been a number of times when we've gone through all the work, we set up the room, we get linens ready, I set up a contract for them. They said, you know what, they figured something out. And what for most cases would be like, I just don't want to work on that. You know what, that's the best option. This person has a permanent place to go. That hour or so of work that I put into it, not a big deal.
So as I mentioned, with our first year live-on requirement, we took some time to really see how this might be impacting the students that are coming to our campus. And we noticed a couple of trends. And one of the trends we noticed was that students were really waiting a long time to decide whether or not they wanted to come because they weren't sure they were going to be able to afford it. And one of the things that we decided we would do with that is we would start, we haven't really given the program a name yet, but we piloted a program where we were basically taking and targeting our highest need student populations, and we're holding slots through our room selection process so that the students that are in those high need situations, if they don't get a low cost room, can contact us and we can help them to get into that low cost housing. And so we piloted that last year. We did it with our students from our educational opportunities program. So we essentially just picked a group that were more likely to be high need. We had about 60 students that were eligible for the program, and we placed 8 of them. So, you know, we also included with that sort of targeted information to them that was focused on helping them to connect into other resources that would be helpful to them. So connecting into My Office, connecting into sort of meal programs that would work well for them, et cetera, et cetera. And this year, we're actually going to be opening it up to the entire population. So we'll be looking at all the students that are coming in, identifying who are highest need, and we brought financial aid to the table. And so financial aid is going to be helping us to identify these students, and we're going to be doing pre-outreach to them to help them get into what's going to be affordable for them through our normal process. We'll be holding spaces for those students that don't get that. And for students that are high need that sign up for higher cost housing, we're actually going to schedule them an appointment with our financial aid office to really figure out whether or not they can afford the housing that they've signed up for. Because what financial aid has been finding, as we've all been kind of watching this, the ripple effect of this first year live-on requirement, is that there are students that are getting through their first term, haven't paid their bill. They're now in financial aid. They've maxed out their aid. They cannot register for classes because they haven't paid their bill, and they need to stop out or maybe even drop out.
And there's a lack of awareness of the housing that they're in is one of our more expensive at times. And so it's how do we get to students before they're in that financial crisis and get them into something that's going to work for them. And I want to give a quick shout out to Teresita Alvarez-Cortez, who helped get this program launched this last year. She's in the room, so we must acknowledge those who helped put it together. But it's been a really great experience, and as Claire had mentioned, the hope this year, now that we're going to be reaching students as they're going through the entire admissions process versus in the spring after they've been admitted, is to help navigate the process on their own, to get into the housing that's going to work for their needs in the timeline in which we've outlined, but then also holding some spaces back for students who are not able to do that for one reason or another. One of the things I had mentioned earlier was break housing. On the OSU campus, with the addition of our live-on policy for our first-year students and the increasing number of international students, we're at about 12 to 14% international students on our campus. we have gotten to a point where we no longer close for the breaks. We had been getting there gradually over time, but what we introduced a year ago is we don't actually charge anything for staying over that 4-week break period. And so not only do we not close our doors, we don't say you have to pay extra if you want to stay. And that was a true commitment to our campus population of it no longer feels right when we're telling students they must live here to say that they must leave for breaks. We do ask that they sign up through our web portal and let us know that they're going to be there because we do have a lot of business things that we do over the breaks. It's a great time for maintenance staff to come in and take care of things. Our residential education staff go in and do room checks. So we do need to know who's in the building, but we don't require them to pay any extra. We're still working a little bit on food options. We do have a dining center that's open over that break period, but we don't have additional meal dollars that we use at that time.
And speaking of food, one of the things that we're also working on is trying to address students who are moving to those dining plans that have a lower cost. So when a student is looking at tuition, housing, fees, textbooks, educational materials, they start to look at where can I lower my costs? And one of those places is food. It's one of the first things to go. We sort of have a statement in my office that students are choosing between textbooks and food. And so what we're seeing in Oregon State is students were signing up for meal plans that were not designed to sustain them. They were designed to support students who maybe have religious or health reasons that they would not be eating in the dining centers as often. And yet students were signing up for this as their primary meal plan. And so they were experiencing either food insecurity and hunger because they were running out of money, or they were experiencing food insecurity without hunger, where they were eating food that's not healthy for them because it's cheap. And so we've had this great synthesis working with our dining services for these make sense meals, which are meals that come in at about $3.50. So for students that are on a dining plan with their discount, it comes in around $3. And these are nutritionally balanced meals. They offer generally a starch, a protein, and vegetable, and they come in around 400 to 700 calories. So they are an adequate meal for the student. And they are also available across campus for anyone else to utilize as well. My office offers a food subsidy. We actually tell the students that this is a great option for you when you get your food subsidy to get a really good meal. One of the other added benefits to that is the students that receive my food subsidy don't live on campus, which means we're actually bringing additional dollars into the system, which may help to recoup some of the cost lost on lowering the costs of food. And there are generally 3 meals a day, every meal, that are offered, and students can actually look up the menus and they can find where they need to go to get those meals.
We're still working a bit on how to market this program. Our dining services staff are a little concerned about if we make this too broad and tell everyone about it, then we've got students who are on these meal plans who are going to get these smaller meals, and then we might have another problem in terms of costs for operating our dining facilities. So we want to make sure that the people who this program is designed for learn about it and are aware of it, but also not broadcasting it too much to get people who don't really need this program to we want them to come and eat the rest of the options that we have. And we're working actually on a program in the next couple of weeks, I believe, showing our RA staff how this program works. One of our chefs is going to come in and cook up a make sense meal and give it to them, because we know that the RAs are the ones living with students, right? They're the ones who are going to know some of the factors and some of the students who are probably using those smaller meal plans to control their cost of their education. And so making sure that those students get resources and access to this program.
And that's an added benefit to our RAs, who a lot of them sign up to be RAs because of the free housing. So we're seeing a lot of times high-need students who are high-achieving applying to be RAs. And so we're also, again, touching on the population that, again, we make assumptions about that they're doing fine where they may not be. So this is what we're doing. We also are working on a number of other things, some of which I'm not going to share right now because I want to announce them once we know them for sure. But one of the things that we have is we have a food insecurity task force. And so we're actually meeting regularly. We've got folks from housing and dining. We've got myself coming from my office. We've got folks across the spectrum in terms of, we've got business ops folks, we've got residential special education folks, we've had some student leaders come in, and we're really asking questions about how are we doing, so assessing the programming that we are currently doing, and really thinking about what are we going to continue to do in the future so that we can support these students in multiple ways.
From the housing and dining side, we really took a look at our dining plans for this current year, saw how many students were selecting our smallest plan, which was really for our specific dietary needs, and then we're using that to control their costs. We completely revamped our dining program for the next year so that we feel like we are comfortable with whatever the plans that we will offer for the next year, that someone can actually live on and have a good variety of food and not be making those poor choices and eating unhealthy because that's the only way they can afford to do it.
And I think a part of this also is just recognizing that the students we're talking about, we want them to be living on campus because these are often the students that most benefit from living on campus. We talk about that value added of what it means to be in a residential environment, and the students that we're talking about, if they aren't on campus with us, they may be more likely to take longer to degree, like Larry was talking about. They may be less likely to stay with us. And so this is a great way to help students become engaged in a way that they may not have in the past.
We want those students to enjoy their experience on campus and return to living on campus the next year. We find we benefit a lot from having non-student leaders living on campus for another year. They, in a way, become mentors to other students and help guide that way. We want a good blend. Yes, we have a first-year student live on requirement, but we also want a high population of returning students who are just really enthusiastic about being a student on Oregon State's campus. So I had mentioned before that when we first started working with Claire in her office on this program, there weren't a lot of other schools who had any sort of comparison to look for. So this was very much unfamiliar waters for us, but we decided that it was our responsibility to make sure that we were providing a program that would serve our OSU community. And so we have to be willing to take that risk to set up and serve our students. So now we're going to walk you through a little bit of the nuts and bolts about how we developed our process. And again, this is just how it worked on our campus. They might have some takeaways for how you could implement some of this on your campus, but we recognize that there are unique processes and politics on all of our campuses that might make some of these things easier or harder for you to implement.
And so obviously it starts with ideas. And when we talk about things that are unique at Oregon State, one of those unique things is that we have an office focused on poverty, hunger, homelessness, and food insecurity. I'll bet you none of you do, because I know that we're one of the few. And so that can be a challenge when it comes to coming up with ideas, because it's my job all day, every day to think about this stuff. Whereas on most campuses, if there are folks asking these questions or having these ideas, it's kind of a side thing that they're working on. And so my recommendation to you is to really start thinking and asking questions. What is our need on our campus? That's a really important question to be asking. What are the resources that we have available to us? What personnel resources do we have? What monetary resources do we have? What space resources do we have? These are all different things that we are utilizing at Oregon State and that you all have on your campus that you could be harnessing to support students. And then the last thing is just my own recommendation as you're having these ideas is to come up with every idea under the sun and then pick one and start small and build from there.
And if you're anything like me, all of the ideas are going to stress you out because you immediately think about how you have to implement them. As someone who's kind of on the ground floor of, okay, there's this really great idea, I now have to go and make sure it's actualized. But it's important to just remove yourself from that and just let there be the free thinking, brainstorming of ideas, work out the details later, but really come to this with what can we do, what are the problems on our campus, what are the trends that we're seeing. Also talk to students. One of the reasons that this program came to be is we actually had some students this was before Claire's office existed, but we had some students pitch this idea to our director at the time, and he was amenable to hearing them out and thinking about how we could support this process, which is something I think is very unique. For us, that meant taking 2 rooms out of our inventory and having them offline These are rooms that are prime real estate, so to speak. I know that I could rent that room out to a student who would be happy there. And I see our accounting person in the room. Cover your ears real quick, Steve. But it's definitely a revenue loss for us to hold these rooms offline so that Claire and her staff can have them available. We also charge at a reduced rate. We charge the same amount that we do for students who come early in the fall who have to be part of our program, which is currently just $18 a day. So when you look at the overall costs of living on a campus, that room would definitely cost more than that.
And when she says charge, it's charged to my office. It is not charged to the student. So my office has some funding and we pick up the costs when students are in that emergency housing space.
And that was, again, another part of our commitment is we're not going to charge the student who's facing that emergency situation for that use of that space, even if it is at a lower cost option. It's Claire's office who covers that charge.
So talking about resources, it's really important to think about the partnerships that can be made. Obviously, we're talking about a very dynamic one right here. That isn't necessarily always possible on campuses that don't have a human services resource center. However, you do have potentially programs that serve underserved populations, programs that are looking at low-income populations. You have your student government on your campus. There's a financial aid office on your campus. And there's probably community resources out and around your campus that could be partnered with as well. You may not need to be creating this internally. You could be working with agencies in your community. So those are just a number of different places where partnerships can exist. You don't have to have my office in order to create these types of partnerships.
And on those partnership lines, I also sit on the board of directors for Claire's office. And that's part of our agreement too, is that as long as this partnership in terms of the work we're doing exists, someone from the housing office will always be on her board. And she hasn't kicked me off yet.
I like that you said that.
It's a matter of time.
So obviously we've been doing some stuff and we've been doing it for some years now. That was very specific, some stuff, some years. However, there are some lessons that we've learned as we've gone through this. And so one of these is we really need to make sure that we don't lose time to process. So meaning that process sometimes will need to happen in a very tight timeline. So when Catherine and I are having a conversation about emergency housing student, we want to get that student in as quickly as we can. So we need to develop processes that are streamlined, organized, and they are tested so that we can have students that are truly in an emergency because they don't have a place to go. We can put that roof over their heads.
When we work in higher education, we love a good process. And we love thinking about all the options that can go into that. And honestly, when we've got someone who's in a true emergency situation, they need to be taken care of immediately. One of the things that's great is Claire always tells me when she makes the initial request what the timeline is for the student. So she's already vetted that out. Do you have a place to go tonight? That's usually a question that they ask. Sometimes they don't. So sometimes that means that I need to up my side of the process to make sure that we can get a room ready. And part of that, one of the things that we have learned is every time someone comes through Claire's office into emergency space, as soon as they're gone, we're turning the room and getting it prepped for the next time. We don't want to lose time for process. I mean, we're losing time for, oh, the linens are still there from the last student who was there 2 months ago, and there's kind of a smell from the garbage that was never taken out, and we want to make sure that that room is ready to go.
The other thing is to have really good documentation from start to finish. So we do a very thorough intake interview with our student, and that allows us to do all the things that we need to do to set things forward. We also have a partnership with our conduct office to do a background check on the student to make sure that we're putting, we're creating safety. We're putting somebody into a community. We want to make sure that we're not bringing danger to that community. And the other thing that I think is really important, and this is something that I'm a little bit better at maybe than Catherine, which is being okay with gray on all those things. Yeah. So being okay with ambiguity and for things kind of needing to be flowy. So yes, we have processes, and yet we also need to stock out of those processes, and we need to move around things sometimes because every situation when we're talking about a crisis and this type of thing is going to be different, and we can't have a process for all of it.
While I do love a good process, I definitely have worked through that on my end as well. One of the things that we've had to work through very quickly is, as I mentioned, oftentimes these requests come through on a Friday afternoon, or when Claire or myself are out of the office, or both of us are gone. So who else knows how to handle these processes? Who can take over and step in when we are gone? Because again, emergency situations, you don't get the time to prepare and plan. you have to roll with it. And so I've made sure that my supervisor and a couple of my staff know what to do. I've got template emails. Everybody knows where to find the contract that we signed with Claire's office and the student, so that the process can continue when I'm not there.
Yeah, and I think that the foundation of all of this is solid relationships. We are only as good as the relationships that we hold on campuses. And so if we don't have a good working relationship, none of this is going to happen. We do have some things we want to do. Primarily, one of the things that we're working on, we've been working on for a long time, and Steve in the back has been a big proponent of, is trying to have SNAP benefits accepted on campus. So students that have food stamps can actually use those right on campus and not have to walk away. And there are students that live in the residence halls that aren't on food stamps. And so, providing them a place to use those without having to leave campus would be really helpful.
You want to know who loves a good process? The federal government. It's taken a very long time to go through all of the steps necessary to get the equipment necessary and get the location ready to go. And, we've been working on it. We'll get it ready in 2020? Yeah, no, now we're hoping to launch in the fall, but it's taking quite a bit of time.
So we've talked about a lot of different things. We do have paper that we can share with folks, either in hard or electronic form. My preference would be electronic. It's a lot easier to get to you. Primarily information around student food insecurity, or we can show you documents that we use, templates, etc. So if you'd like to read up more, please email us. We were more than happy to share that information, and we'll put our email up on the last slide.
And again, this was the path that we took on the Oregon State campus and the OSU Housing Office and Claire's partnership. Your path will look different, but be thinking about that path. What would it take to provide options for students who are at most risk on your campus?
So as promised, there is our email. If you want to be in touch with us, we are happy to answer questions, share documentation or ideas. And with that, we would like to thank you all, those who are here in the room and those who are live streaming with us, for joining us, and open it up for questions if anyone has any. We did. Yeah, in the back.
You said you subsidize the program. Where is the funding for subsidies?
So the question is about subsidies, specifically from the program that I'm, the food subsidies. We are funded through student fees.
And everyone pays those student fees, correct?
Yes, everyone pays those student fees. Right now, students are paying $6.40 a term in student fees that support my office.
How do you differentiate between a fee company and long-term company?
Yeah, part of that, and that's a good question. So how do we differentiate between a short-term need and a longer-term emergency need? First off, with our partnership, when Claire brings someone into the emergency spaces we have on campus, it's for 2 weeks. And then it can be renewed for up to 4 weeks total. And so Claire's office is actually working with students through that whole duration of time, trying to find out what's their plan. So you've got your first 2 weeks. Sometimes, actually most of the time, I'd say students are able to get permanent housing or get into a different situation after those 2 weeks. But every now and then, they need another 2 weeks to figure it out, or they have to go meet with this office and it's only open every third Thursday, and all of these kinds of things. And so we try and work with them where we can, but I don't know that we've ever extended anyone past those 4 weeks.
No, our memorandum of understanding actually states that 28 days is the maximum, and I'm very clear with students when they come in that that's the most we'd be able to house them. However, you are correct in saying that we do have students that are chronically homeless, and we do support them at OSU. We might utilize a 2-week time frame to get them under a roof just for finals, for example. We've had students sleeping in the library, we've had students staying in vehicles, and that's kind of where my office does some more wraparound care, along with maybe the library staff, maybe with our campus partners like the Dean of Student Life Office or Campus Police. We've worked with transit and parking services for the student that was living in a van to get him a free parking space near a power outlet that was reserved so that he could utilize that to charge a laptop. So there are a lot of ways for us to get creative in those situations, recognizing that we can't house students forever. It's just not sustainable to have a program like that. That said, as Catherine's right, 10 days is generally the max stay. Like that's most students don't even stay the full 2 weeks. Like I said, we had one student that moved into an apartment yesterday. The other student, we had to do an extension on because he's working to try and get into one of our local homeless shelters to sustain him through this term. When this term ends, he's actually gonna have an engineering internship. So he's gonna be leaving town entirely and moving to a paid internship in engineering. So hopefully he'll be housed by then. We're also gonna work with him on how do we accrue the money that you need when you move for this internship to pay for first, last, and deposit. And so he and I will be having those conversations once we get him settled into the shelter.
One of the questions that we get often, and Claire and I talk about, you talk about the critical lens on this, well, why don't we just get someone into a permanent housing contract for the rest of the year? And that's always an option, but for the most part, there's students who might be, they might have pets. We can't allow that on campus. They might have different situations where the best option is just that emergency situation so that they can get into something else. But that's always an option for them. We always talk about that, and Claire advocates for our office very well. Would you like to just move on campus? And we've done that a few times. There have been some students who have just signed housing contracts and moved on campus and become part of our community.
Yes. What is the success rate with regard to students entering this program?
So the question is, what's the retention rate for students utilizing this program? Would you be more specific about which program you're talking about?
Well, as well as probably that.
So the question's focused on how are we tracking students to see are they staying in school and if they're utilizing the services. And I do not have statistics for that. We have been in operation for 4 years, and so most of the students that we're serving are actually still on campus. We do see students drop out, but I'm sorry, I can't be satisfied not to give you numbers at this moment.
But that's a great place to go in the future as we continue to sustain this program. How effective is it in helping those students get to graduation? Yeah, that's a great clarifying point. So those Make Sense meals are offered in our dining centers. And so at every major mealtime, breakfast, lunch, dinner during the week, we have at least one Make Sense meal in each dining location.
Actually, on the Make Sense meals, were those designed in collaboration with a private food service provider then? Is that who runs the dining services?
Nope, we are an internally run. It's all of our dining staff, and actually, from what I understand, our chefs have had a really great time developing this program.
Okay.
Some of the Make Sense meals, I eat them too at lunch because it fills me up, which I like to eat.
Okay.
And they're really great options.
I saw a question over here. Yep.
Can you talk about the notion of background check? I'm assuming you don't do background checks on all of your residents, and then that is typically not a very timely process. So can you talk more about that?
So the question is about background checks. It's unusual considering we don't background check students and they're coming onto campus if they're going to be living with us, and also because it's time consuming. The decision to go with a background check, which actually is not time consuming, we're not doing a criminal history background check. What I do is I call our conduct office, I give them an ID number, and they say red flags or no red flags. It's that simple. So we're not doing a full criminal background check, but what we are doing is we're looking to see, did the student get kicked out of housing before? Does the student have any prior violent behavior or anything that would be concerning in their record with the university? And the reason that we did that is just really for risk management purposes. With a short-term stay, we just want to make sure that if we're putting somebody into the community and something were to happen, that we've done our due diligence. All right, I think I